everyone. Welcome in. I am Ashton Pollard here with Tyler Horka from blueandgold.com, and we just wrapped up practice number 7. Like yesterday, we could only see the first 5 periods, so just around 30 minutes, but we did get a little bit out of that, and then we were able to talk with 6 defensive linemen and defensive line coach Al Washington after practice, so we'll touch on that a little bit too, but we'll start with practice this morning. Tyler, what did you see primarily out there on the offensive side?
Yeah, we got to see some one-on-ones today, so quarterbacks and running backs and tight ends versus linebackers. And as I wrote for blueandgold.com, premium observations, advantage offense. I thought Tyler Buckner looked really good. This was probably his best 5-period session that we've seen. Again, we don't see a lot from the quarterbacks in those 5 periods, but we saw 5 full minutes of Buckner throwing to tight ends, throwing to running backs. He threw a dime to Tyree down the sideline. J.D. Bertrand trying to cover Tyree, that's a mismatch. I feel bad for J.D. Bertrand. Hopefully he's not lined up on Travion Henderson, for example, on September 3rd.
But he might have to be, which should be interesting.
And that's probably why Notre Dame did this today. They said, hey, linebackers, we've got good skill guys, but so do they, so try to go cover them. But just an absolute dime down the right sideline. Buckner knew that Tyree had Bertrand beat and just laid it out there for him. Tyree ran right under it. Shades of Kevin Austin Jr. against Virginia Tech last year and what I thought was Tyler Buckner's best throw of the 2021 season, but it didn't have to be downfield throws. It could have been hitch routes from tight ends. I know Michael Mayer ran a really good route. It was actually Drew Pine who hit him on the money, but I think I could have thrown that pass. That's how open Michael Mayer was. Kevin Bauman ran a really good route, and Tyler Buckner hit him. The running backs ran really good routes. Of course, I mentioned Tyree, but Audric Estime got free from a defender, and the quarterbacks knew that I think the offense, their tight ends and their running backs had the advantage, and they knew that, okay, if I drop back, all I have to do is put the ball there, and they did. I think that was the most telling sign for me that these quarterbacks are engaged. I talked about it a little bit yesterday, that they look comfortable out there. They weren't missing wide open passes. I think there were 2 incomplete passes in 5 minutes of throws. So really good for the running backs and the tight ends. Not so great for the linebackers. But again, try to cover Tyree one-on-one. Try to cover Michael Mayer one-on-one.
Logan Diggs had a nice move on Will Schweitzer, the linebacker, where it was one of those ankle-breaking Diggs-esque moves, I guess, reminiscent of the videos that we saw of him working on his footwork a couple of weeks back from his trainer. So, yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, and these guys are really good. Notre Dame has good skill position players. And as I wrote, if you're a little worried about the Notre Dame wide receivers, which you probably should be, by the way, Deion Colsey was not practicing today. He was in a knee brace on his left knee. It was more like a stabilizer, so that could be a long-term thing. We don't know. We'll talk to Marcus Freeman tomorrow, and he'll tell us more insight, but not active. Doesn't look like he'll be active tomorrow, maybe for the foreseeable future. We'll see. But as it pertains to the wide receivers, if you're worried about them, by the way, the Notre Dame tight ends, running backs, they're really good. So that assuages some of those fears about the Notre Dame wide receivers.
Yeah, and I know this spring we asked Deland McCullough, the running backs coach, and I asked a bunch of the running backs kind of about that Kyron Williams-esque, who's going to be the pass catcher version of him, not just the running back. And they all said that they're working on pass plays in their hands and all of that stuff just as much as they're working on run plays. So I think that that's a primary focus. And yes, while Tyler is right that maybe there is a little bit of a depth concern, it's not like the Notre Dame coaches aren't aware of that, and it's not like they're not working on it and trying to mitigate that with the tight ends and the running backs. So to switch over to the defensive side of the ball, I guess, like you said, kind of the linebackers maybe struggled a little bit, but that's more of a positive for the offense maybe than a negative for the defense. I was watching the corners and the safeties kind of down on the other end of the field. These one-on-ones were happening, I guess, around like the 50-yard line-ish, around the middle of the field. And they all looked pretty good. I mean, they weren't working against anybody. It was a lot of working on, like, I guess, interceptions type of things. They had a couple GAs throwing, which a couple of those GAs, I know are former quarterbacks, they can throw. Like, I was like, what? Like, who is throwing that? I expected to turn around and see, like, maybe Steve Angeli throwing it. No, it was a GA, and they were throwing these dimes. But everyone's hands looked pretty good, at least among the starters. Your DJ Brown, your Brandon Joseph, they look pretty good. So, I guess more back up to the front 7, we talked with Al Washington and 6 of the defensive linemen just a minute ago. What were your main takeaways from any of the conversations that you had?
Well, I started talking to Justin Adamalola because in the spring, or I guess this was winter, I think it was right after all those seniors said they were coming back. Yeah. Notre Dame let us talk to all those guys. Justin Adamalola told me, and I think I might have been the only one at the table, this is going to be the best defensive line in college football.
His twin brothers told me the same thing. So.
There's a lot of confidence between those twins, let me tell you. But I came back 8 months later and I said, why do you think that's still the case? And he kind of laid it out for me. There's a bunch of veteran dudes on this Notre Dame defensive line, and I think that's why we talked to so many of them today, is because Notre Dame's comfortable. It said, hey, these guys have been here for a while. They're really good. Alex Ahrensberger maybe hasn't talked to the media as much as an Isaiah Foskey has, but they're comfortable in all of these guys. And you have a Foskey who just went for the sack record last year, came up a couple short, 2.5 I think it was. By the way, he has a relationship with Justin Tuck, and Justin Tuck says, I don't want you to break my records, so that might be a little motivation for Isaiah Foskey. But I think the main takeaway from today was it's a hungry group. Yeah. It's a group that's already done a lot, but a group that knows it can do a lot more. I mean, this is a Notre Dame team that tied the program record in sacks for a single season with 41. And I think they're out there not thinking about 42, 45. I think they're thinking about 50. Yeah. And, and it's possible. Say Foskey gets 14 or 15. Justin Adamalola, who I talked to, had 5 last year. He's probably shooting for 7, 8, 9, maybe even 10. Yeah. There's half of 50 right there. So confident group, hungry group, talented group. I think these guys are really good.
Yeah, and then I'll add to that, Jason Adamalola was talking with us, and he implied, he didn't say this, but he was like, you kind of hear about the twins, the Foskeys, the very high-level veterans, but he was like, you guys aren't talking enough about Gabe Rubio, Jason Anye, kind of that second, third team in there, too, that I know we talk a lot as Notre Dame people about kind of the depth, and Notre Dame will get these star players, your Kyle Hamiltons, your Isaiah Foskeys up front, but where they struggle is they don't have the depth to match, say, your Alabama or your Georgia, and I'm not necessarily saying that that's what this front is, but I think it's telling that we asked Jason Adamalola about kind of your big names, and he was like, wait a minute, no, I want to talk about Gabe Rubio, and I want to talk about Jason Anye. And that's obviously no disrespect to his brother, Foskey. They're all best friends. I talked with them about going to Yankee Stadium, going back to New York a couple of weeks ago, which I'll post up on blueandgold.com in the next couple of days. But yeah, I think tight-knit is a perfect word, and then it extends beyond your superstars, your brand names. And then we'll kind of end, I guess, with what Al Washington talked about. As happens often with a lot of these things, he kind of ran through all the players because everybody gets brought up. But I think what stuck out to me was just, I guess, his comments on the offensive line, actually, and how much he kept using iron sharpens iron, talking about Blake Fisher going up against Foskey and all of that, and just how awesome it is that he has a Harry Hiestand-led offensive line that his guys are working up against, and how that's going to prepare them for your Ohio States or otherwise Clemson's, whatever. So what stuck out to you about what Washington was saying?
Yeah, I mean, Washington has something to say about everything you ask him, yeah. And there's some coaches.
Great interview.
There's some coaches that don't. You mentioned Gabe Rubio, and I'm blanking at what he called him, but I think he called him the teach tape guy, or
he said something to the effect of, yeah, he's like a walking teach tape. Right. Like,
and I thought that was awesome that he's got like that specific of a nickname for a guy who might get second team reps this year. It might be
yeah.
Might still be a third stringer. And again, he said that as well. He qualifies his statements. He said, this guy is perfect in terms of technique. He does everything that I ask. He does everything you don't even have to ask a guy like Gabe Rubio to do the things that he needs to do. He's already doing them. And then he qualified and said, but you got to remember, he's just a sophomore. So this is something that you're going to see probably next year, 2 years. You might not see it on the field this year, but it's happening in practices. So iron sharpens iron, absolutely. I asked some of the guys about that too, and they said these offensive linemen are really bringing it because of Harry Hiestand. And I wrote about that a couple times in the last 24 hours for blueandgold.com. So I think it's really cool that once again, we have a Notre Dame team here who top 5 in the preseason, by the way. Coaches poll came out and they came in at number 5, and the strengths of the team are exactly what you would expect. Yeah. It's offensive line, defensive line, and let's lump tight ends in there as well because you have a guy named Michael Mayers. So it's really cool to talk to in the last 2 days the guys who are the masterminds behind that. Harry Hiestand yesterday, Al Washington today, and once you talk to them, you kind of get the gist of why those are probably the 2 best position groups on the team, is because they're led by guys who know what they're doing, can articulate what they're doing, and it trickles down to the players.
Yeah, I think definitely their ability to articulate it sticks out to me, and then to hear their coaches, their position coaches echo it. I know Al Golden did it with the linebackers too. Just like these guys are so smart, and they already act like professionals. Like these coaches are not in there telling them to to get up, to come to practice prepared. I think Al Washington said that Riley Mills, whenever Washington goes into his office, Mills is already in there, like asking for pointers, asking what he can do better. So I think the program is in good hands, obviously, from the coaching staff, but I think these guys are also so good at what they do, and they're already basically professionals that it's just going to come down to what exactly happens on the field. So with that, we will wrap up here. As I believe Tyler mentioned a second ago, we will talk with Marcus Freeman tomorrow, so we will be back. That's where we get a lot of our kind of roster updates, injury updates, and stuff like that. The assistants tend to defer to the head coach, which makes sense. But in the meantime, check out blueandgold.com. Our $1 deal is still running. That gets you access to everything, premium content, message board content, all of our recruiting stuff as well. So make sure you head over there to check out what we post from today, and then over the weekend, tomorrow, and up until September 3rd. We will be back next time.